Hello, and welcome to my world. Well, I'm pleased to finally report that I am making some noticeable progress on the new modified Tamiya Clod Buster truck that I am building right now. So, I've been ordering a whole bunch of parts for this truck for so long, and finally I've been able to start putting stuff together and finally make a video showing some of the massive progress that I've made. And right now in this video, I'm going to show you the two front and rear gear case and axle assemblies now that they are all completed, all put together, and they're ready to install in the chassis. So on the left is the front gear case, and on the right is the rear axle. So one thing that I did a little bit different, if you compare these axle assemblies compared to the axle assemblies I've used on my previous trucks, is that I decided to use different manufacturers' parts, and I've decided to use a little bit different configurations of parts for this truck. So I just wanted to do something a little bit different, not too crazy. I'm not going full 4-link suspensions and link mount shocks and none of that kind of crazy stuff, but I just want to do things just a little bit different here to just change gears a little bit. So in this video, I'm going to show you the parts that I used for these axle assemblies, and I'll just kind of talk you through a little bit of my thought process and why I chose them and that sort of thing. So in case you want to build something similar, here's an idea to get some creative juices flowing in your mind as far as how you would like to build your custom Clod Buster. So as I showed in my previous video, I am using Hesse Machine aluminum gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles this time around. And if you have seen my previous video, I did a whole video on machined aluminum gear cases and axle tubes for Clod Busters, and I showed some of the details of these specific axle assemblies that you see here. But I've now finally completed them by adding the motors and also all the steering components. So we'll start at the front here. And this is an, let me turn it this way, a little easier to see. This is an aluminum bumper assembly with a built-in steering mount from Pargu, and I like this steering bumper with the servo mount on it because the Pargu is the only one I know of that has this nice tubular shaped bumper on the front of it, and it looks similar to the stock red plastic Clod Buster bumper. And I from day one, I've always loved the way those red bumpers look on the Clod Buster axle assemblies, and that's going all the way back. When I first saw the Clod Buster, I saw those bright red bumpers down there, and a lot of people take them off. A lot of people don't like the way they look, but I was always the weird guy who just, I really liked the look of those. So I also, because of that, I liked how Pargu kind of kept that same look to the bumpers. And you notice on my other trucks, I have the ESP twin tube lower bumpers, and those, on those bumpers, the tubes are straight at the ends, but I really liked how Pargu curved all 4 of the tubes back like that, right there. And it kind of looks a lot like, well, if you're an old school 4-wheeler like me, they look like Smitty built dual tube bumpers that used to be sold for full scale 4x4s, and I had a set of Smitty built bumpers on the front and rear of my truck back when I had a truck, and just always loved the look of those. So that's why I really like the Pargu bumper. Now, just a heads up though, the Pargu bumper, because it has the servo mounted on it, this bumper is way far forward away from the axle, more so than the stock Tamiya plastic red bumpers on the Clod Buster. So these will hurt your approach and departure angles on your truck, and that's won't be a problem for this truck because the tires I'm using are so much bigger in diameter compared to the stock Clod Buster tires. So the IMAX Swamp Dog tires are pretty huge, and if you want to see how big those are, take a look at another previous video I did on Clod Buster tires, and I show those tires compared to the stock Clod Buster tires. So just something to keep in mind. And that's true, I'm the last guy in the world to be mounting servos on the bumpers. of my Clod Buster. Everybody else has been doing this for years and decades at this point. I'm like the last guy to be doing this, so for me it was a little bit of a surprise how much the front bumper has to be pushed forward to accommodate for the servo being mounted here. So everybody else already knows about that, but I'm the last guy to discover that. So just a heads up, the bumpers, the Pargu bumpers are mounted and they're pushed considerably farther forward compared to the stock ones. So mounted to that bumper is a high-tech HS 6, let me look up the part number here, it's 645MG steering servo. And I've always liked those servos because they're cheap, especially when I bought them. High-Tech has raised the prices on all of their servos recently, or at least these ones went up in price considerably. So when I bought them, they were really cheap still. And they're also pretty strong. I remember when these, back in the day, these were like one of the strongest analog servos that you could get. And that's probably not so true now, but I still like them. I used them on Raging Bull, and I liked it a lot. That truck has one servo on it, but I really like it. Plenty strong enough for my use. I'm not racing in the IFMAR World Finals or anything, so I don't have lightning. I'm an older guy, so I don't have super fast reflexes, so super fast servos really don't. It's wasted money for me, to be honest with you. And these are plenty strong enough, and I've used similar servos with a similar amount of output for all my other trucks without any issues. So, and they work great on Raging Bull, so I'm very happy to have those. Attached to that servo on the front and rear are Kimbrough heavy-duty servo savers, and all of the steering links are Crawford Performance Engineering aluminum steering links. And here's what the complete, I'll give a side view here of the complete axle assembly. Here's what it looks like from the back. Yes, mounted to the motor is the Stormer Hobbies 4-to-1 gear reduction unit. So check out one of my previous videos that I filmed where I showed some detailed information about those gear reduction units and how they work and what they look like, both before they're assembled and after they're put together. Bolted to the gear reduction unit is the Team Brood Racing 27-turn single modified motor. And on the motor leads, I have Dean's 12-gauge wet noodle wire with a Dean's Ultra Plug. And on all my trucks, I use genuine Ultra Plugs. These are not the unknown generic brand T-plugs that you see all over the internet nowadays. These are the real deals. These are actually from Dean's. And same thing with the wires. These are genuine Dean's wet noodle wires, 12-gauge. I use Ultra Plugs on all of my motor wire leads simply for maintenance. It is so much easier to do maintenance on a Clod Buster, whether it's re-greasing the gears in here or replacing a gear, replacing a bearing in there, replacing a damaged axle shaft, any of that type of work. It's so much easier to just unplug the motor and then just remove the entire gear case and axle assembly as a whole unit from the truck, and then I can tear apart the entire gear case and axle tubes on my workbench, as opposed to having to unsolder the motor leads here and then take the motor out, leave that in the truck to avoid having to desolder the wires. That's just such a hassle. And I used to do that back a long time ago, and it just got to be such a burden. I said, forget it. So from quite a long time now, I've been using just Dean's Ultra Plugs. So if you look at any of my other trucks, I always have Dean's Ultra Plugs on my motor wires, and it just makes maintenance and gear ratio changes and stuff like that, just makes it so much easier. Just unplug it in a fraction of a second. Don't have to get the soldering iron out. Don't have to heat it up. Don't have to do any of that stuff. Just makes it so much easier and so much simpler. Clipped onto the motor is a red anodized aluminum heatsink, motor heatsink that I bought that off of eBay. I don't remember who manufactured that. Probably just some generic one that I got from somewhere along the way. And the pinion gear that I have on the end here, that is a Robinson Racing 32 pitch 12 tooth hard anodized steel pinion gear, and it's now inside the gear case here, but I showed it in my Stormer gear reduction video that I made, but on the end of the Stormer gear reduction unit is a Tamiya steel 0.8 mod 13 tooth pinion gear. And yes, it does mesh perfectly fine with the stock Clod Buster gears that are inside of the gear case. And I know a lot of Tamiya fans make a huge deal about you got to use metric pitch pinion gears to go in Tamiya cars, since the Tamiya gears are all metric pitch. And I can't speak for other Tamiya cars and trucks, but at least with the Clod Buster, and I know now because I now have a true metric 0.8 mod pinion gear in this truck, and I have 32 pitch, 13 tooth, and 12 and 14 tooth pinion gears in some of my other trucks. It makes no difference. Okay, I'll say that right here, right now. I've been running Imperial 32 pitch pinion gears from Robinson Racing in all of my other trucks for ever since the late 1987. On one of my trucks, my ESP Clodzilla 4 Gravedigger truck, that has 32 pitch pinion gears in it. There are 14 tooth ones, steel ones. I've been using those since late 1987 in that truck. Originally I used the stock 32 tooth size, but I later upgraded. I replaced those with 14 tooth ones later on when I had adjustable motor mounts. But I've been running 32 pitch gears in that truck since late 1987 with no problems whatsoever. So this rumor that you have to use metric pitch 0.8 pitch pinion gears in a Clod Buster, based on my experience now, my literally decades of experience, don't believe it. Okay, I'm sure technically, yes, there is like a tiny minuscule difference between 32 pitch gears and 0.8 mod pinion gears, but in practice, actual use, I have not seen any difference whatsoever. Okay, and as I said in that other video about the Stormer gear reductions, the 0.8 mod pinion gears that I have in here were made by Tamiya. They were steel. My brother bought them and he ran them in his Clod Buster and didn't have any problems with them whatsoever. So he had good luck running metric pitch pinion gears in his Clod Buster, and I've had great results using Imperial 32 pitch pinion gears in my Clod Busters and my bullheads. So use either one. It doesn't make a difference whatsoever. So please, if anybody's had any repercussions of using 32 pitch pinion gears in their Clod Buster or bullhead, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm out there in left field, but all I know is just what I've experienced firsthand, and I've had no problems running 32 pitch pinion gears in my trucks. Now, that being said, I've said this before in one of my other videos, but make sure you replace the stock aluminum pinion gears, 13 tooth pinion gears that come with the Clod Buster. Do not use the stock Tamiya ones. Those wear out super fast. They're made out of really soft aluminum, which is basically the same hardness as butter, in my opinion. So you'll quickly burn through those stock aluminum pinion gears. I burned through them with just this kit's stock 540 motors way back in 1987. So one of the first modifications I always make with any Clod Buster bullhead that I suggest to anybody is first get bearings, and also at the same time, while you're in there, also get steel pinion gears. So the stock Clod Buster uses 13 tooth pinion gears, and just pick up a pair of 13 tooth steel pinion gears. I like the ones from Robinson Racing, but there's lots of other different ones out there you can use, and just put those in the kit while you're putting it together. So save yourself the hassle of replacing worn out stock Tamiya aluminum pinion gears. So also, one other thing I like to mention too is that the Pargu servo mount bumper brackets right here, those aluminum ones, those are designed to accommodate for the steel axle stays that go here and here. And I always advocate using those. Makes your axles stronger. If you never jump your truck, your Clod Buster never leaves the ground, then you'll probably be okay running them without it. But It doesn't hurt to have them. Always extra strength in your axle assembly area on a Clodbuster or bullhead is never a bad thing. So I'd always advocate putting those in, either the stock steel ones or aftermarket aluminum ones. Those are really nice too. I would have used them on my truck, on this truck here, but the problem with that is that the quad shock mounts that I have for this truck, they don't have enough space for those steel axle stays. So there's not enough room for those. So unfortunately I have a choice, either use the quad shock setup or use the steel axle stays. And since this is more of a show truck, the quad shock setup won out that normally I always advocate using the steel axle stays there. But these brackets, there's a little bit of material machined out right there and right there on the brackets, and that is to accommodate for the thickness of the steel axle stays. And since mine doesn't have the axle stays, what I did was I put a little aluminum spacer right there on this side, and that is a spacer for the 3mm screw right here. And the thinnest I could find for those spacers is 2mm, which is what you see right here. The thickness of the steel axle stay is a little less than 2. It's around 1.5 or 1.6 millimeters thick. I can't remember exactly. But I put so the smallest I could get was 2mm. They don't make a 1.5 or 1.6 millimeter thick spacer that I could find anyways. So I put the 2mm thick one there, and then I used the spacer that Pargu supplied on this side. So I originally did buy another aluminum spacer that was whatever length this one is plus 2mm. So I'd add 2mm here on the right and add another 2mm here on the left. But when I tried to stuff that longer spacer in here, it wouldn't fit. So it was too tight. So basically I just put one 2mm spacer there, and then I just left out the spacer, the longer spacer here, went with the original Pargu supplied spacer right here on the left, and the bumper mounted up perfectly with no problems whatsoever, no binding or anything like that. So worked great. So on the completed truck, it's going to look a little something like this. So there we go. So just imagine a big chassis in between the two, black Clod Buster body on top, and some tires on it and wheels, and this is my completed truck. So one thing too, to accommodate for the four-wheel steering, this truck will have four-wheel steering on it with dual servos. To accommodate for that, normally what I do, and I did this on my Clodzilla 4 Gravedigger truck, on the rear axle assembly, my Clodzilla 4 truck also has four-wheel steering with servos mounted on the axles, but they're not mounted on the bumpers. I'm using the ESP Clodzilla 4 servo mounts on that truck. But to accommodate for the rear steering, the way four-wheel steering Clodbusters work and bullheads work, when you have the servos mounted on the axles and you have dual servos, is the way to get the rear servo, it has to be reversed in order to get the truck to steer correctly. So to reverse the steering on the rear servo on my ESP Clodzilla 4 truck is real simple. I just used a Y cable, Y connector, that connects to the plugs right here on the rear servo and on the front servo. And then I just simply reversed the servo saver on the rear servo. So I flip it around 180 degrees on the servo spline, on the servo's output shaft. But the problem with the Pargu bumper mounts is that they mount the servo a little bit too close to the gear case. So there was not enough room to flip around the Kimbrough large servo saver on the rear servo. So this horn of the rear servo saver would hit the gear case back here. So not quite enough room to do that. So in order to get the rear servo to steer in the correct direction on this truck, I had to buy a Y cable with a servo reverser on it. And I've never used one of those before. So as I said, on my Clodzilla 4 Gravedigger truck, I just simply flipped around the servo saver on the rear servo's output shaft, and that reversed the servo direction, so I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. I just bought, for that truck, I just bought a regular servo Y connector, and without any reversing function in it, and it worked fine. For this truck, had to get a servo reverser. So what I did was, I bought one of these online, and this is from Skibby's Performance Mods, and this is a Y cable, servo Y cable with a built-in reverser for the rear servo. And I connected this thing up, did some bench tests with my radio, everything connected up fine, and this one didn't work. And what it was doing was the rear servo, the reversed one, sometimes didn't work at all. I'd steer my radio to the left and to the right, and the rear servo would just sit there like it wasn't connected at all. So I checked the wiring, everything was connected correctly, and for some reason it just didn't work. I'd have to turn off the radio system and turn it back on again, and then sometimes the rear servo would jump to life and then it would start working. So it didn't happen all the time, maybe about once every 10 or 12 times that I turned on the system that the rear servo wouldn't work, but it was really kind of flaky. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When it didn't work, I just had to reboot the entire system and then it worked fine, but very strange. But that didn't sit well with me. But then the real reason why this one is sitting here in the bag is because the real problem with it is that it caused the rear servo to not center itself. So for some reason, the reversed output of this reverser right here, for some reason the output of it was not centered, and like as though the steering trim on my radio was like moved out maybe 3 or 5 degrees from center, and it was really weird. And it kept doing it. Was just, as soon as I turned it on, it would, like, this rear servo would be centered perfectly like you see here, and then with the axles pointing straight. And all of a sudden, when I turned it on, it would just pull to the left or to the right, I can't remember which way, about 3 to 5 degrees every time. And it just held it there. And there was no way to fix that. So that really, yeah, that was out of the question. Can't use that. So anyways, so these were sold on eBay, and I bought it because it looked real cool. It's got this nice 3D printed enclosure for the PC board for the reversing circuit. Looks really nice and neat and cool, but it's useless. I have no use for this. It's going to sit and collect dust now. So I would not advise buying one of these if you need to reverse your Clod Buster or Bullhead's rear steering servo. But I managed to find this, and this is supposedly the same thing. It's a servo Y connector with a reversing circuit built into it. And I don't know where I got it from. I think it's made by MPI Maxx, a company that made servo accessories. I have some of their parts on some of my other trucks, but I don't know where I got it from. It was just sitting in a box of old radio equipment that I had collecting dust. So don't ask me where I got it from. I think it's made by MPI Maxx, but I'm not positive. It looks very similar to an old MPI Maxx servo reversing Y cable that they made a long time ago. That's not in production anymore. At least it's not on their website anymore. So I don't know where I got it from. I don't know how much I paid for it. It's just sitting in that box. So I plugged it in, and guess what? This old thing worked. So so I was so happy to see it worked. It works great. And one thing that sets this one apart from the Skibby's Performance Mods one is that if you look in the end here, see that blue and white component right there on the PC board? That is an adjustment pot, and that allows you, if you turn that, it allows you to adjust the trim of the rear steering servo. So I was able to plug it in and just simply turn that little pot right there. I just turned that with a screwdriver, and it centered my servo perfectly. So my advice is, if you're going to buy one of these Y cables, servo Y cables with a reverser circuit built into it, make sure it has some form of adjustment method to adjust the trim of the reverse servo. I don't know why that makes a difference, why you even need to do that, but evidently it's critical to have that built into the Y cable with the reversing output on it. So just to sum up a little bit, this one does not have that adjustment, the Skibby's one, so no adjustment for that. Cannot adjust the reverse servo's trim with the Skibby's one, so don't buy that one. Buy this one, or buy one like this that has some kind of adjustment on it. So I noticed that on the MPI Maxx website, they have a newer version of this that has buttons on the PC board to allow you to adjust the trim of the reverse servo. So I don't know if that works better than the pot that's on this one, but it looks like MPI Maxx is one of the few companies. I've seen some of these other servo reversers from other companies, and they don't have that kind of adjustment too. So MPI Maxx seems to be one of the few companies that understands that you do need to be able to adjust the trim of the rear servo separately from the trim of the non-reversed front servo. So just something to keep in mind. Save yourself a few bucks, and just remember, make sure you look for that feature if you are buying one of these servo reversing Y cables for the steering system on your Clod Buster or Bullhead. So now that I have all of these axle assemblies all put together, I can finally say that these aftermarket parts that I have here all fit together really easily. I didn't have to file anything or drill anything or modify anything to get the parts to fit together. And that is an issue often that I have found with building Clod Busters and Bullheads. And that problem is that a lot of aftermarket parts from manufacturers are designed to work with the stock Tamiya parts only. And they're not really designed to fit together with other aftermarket parts from different manufacturers. So this particularly was a problem when trying to fit some parts from ESP onto the JPS gear cases or JPS axle tubes. I always had to modify parts or design my own parts or just make little changes here and there in order to get, for example, ESP parts to fit on JPS parts. So that always was an issue back in the day. And with these, I did not have any problems with fitting the Pargu bumpers and servo mounts onto the Hesse Machine aluminum gear cases, or with trying to fit the Stormer gear reductions onto the Hesse Machine gear cases. All those parts fit together perfectly with no issues whatsoever. So as I said, I did not have any problems fitting the Pargu servo mount bumpers onto the Hesse Machine gear cases, but there was, on the rear one right here, there was an issue I had with the bumper bracket. There's some machining scars, looks like some tooling marks there and there, kind of ugly. They don't affect how the bumper bracket works or anything, but just looks kind of ugly. And also on this other bracket right there, you can also see there's what looks like a machining scar, tooling mark there. Shouldn't be there. And none of those marks are present on either this bracket or this bracket. So just on two of them have those ugly machining scars on there. So those are the only problems I had with the Pargu servo mount bumpers. And when I mounted the Stormer gear reductions on here, one thing about them, and this is also true on the King Clod with its JPS gear cases, the Stormer aluminum bracket on the Stormer gear reductions doesn't quite fill up those slots right there for the adjustable motor mounts in the gear case. So this is also present on the JPS gear cases on the ESP King Clod, since that also has these Stormer 4-to-1 gear reductions on it. But I can fill those, or cover up those holes with a little bit of silicone caulking. So no problems there. And there's also, I don't know if it can see, there's also a little bit of a hole right in there too that I could cover up. I don't know if that can quite show up on camera, but just fill those up with a little bit of silicone caulking, keep the dirt out of there. And oh, speaking of dirt, one thing you notice on the Stormer gear reductions is that they are exposed. So the pinion gear and the spur gear are both not covered up. I wish Stormer had some kind of gear cover that they made to cover that up, a plastic one or something, or maybe one made out of aluminum, be real fancy. But the only way to prevent wear or help minimize the wear there, since they are exposed to the elements, is by not using any grease on the pinion gear and the spur gear. Because if you put grease on there, since they're exposed, dirt will stick to that grease and it acts like sandpaper between the gears. So the only way to avoid that is just leave them like you see here, completely dry with no grease on them. I know it looks terrible, and if you're into RC cars and RC trucks, you know, put a light coat of grease on all of your gears, but with the Stormer gear reductions, this is the only way to help prevent wear on those gears. And oh, one other thing too, before I forget, is when I did the videos on the Hesse Machine and JPS and hot racing aluminum gear cases, I didn't have any motors and had no experience with mounting motors on the Hesse Machine gear cases just yet when I made that video. Now that I've finally mounted the motors on here, I have a little bit more experience with adjusting motors and adjusting pinion gear mesh with the Hesse Machine gear cases. And unfortunately, one of the problems with the Hesse Machine gear cases is that their adjustable motor mounts do not allow the use of any pinion gear smaller than the stock size 13-tooth ones. So if you're planning to run bigger tires on your Clod Buster, like what I'm doing, or if you're planning on making a rock crawling type truck where you need to gear it down and use a pinion gear smaller than the 13-tooth stock size one, the Hesse Machine adjustable motor mounts will not allow any pinion gear smaller than 13-tooth. So that may be a problem. For me, it's not, because although I wasn't planning to originally, but I just, as I said in my previous video, I just happened to stumble across these brand new Stormer gear reduction units. So for me, since I have the gear reduction units on here, I don't need to use a pinion gear smaller than 13-tooth inside the gear cases here. But if I did, and originally before I found these Stormer gear reduction units for sale, I was planning on using a 12-tooth pinion gear and then mounting the motor directly onto the Hesse Machine gear cases, and that would have been impossible due to the lack of the ability to use smaller pinion gears on the Hesse Machine gear cases, because the motor slot cut in here is not quite long enough to move the motor closer to the counter gear inside here. So you can go bigger. I'm not sure exactly how much of a larger pinion gear you can use with the Hesse Machine gear cases, but you just cannot go smaller than the stock 13-tooth one. So that's something to keep in mind. And that may be a reason to buy the hot racing or JPS aluminum gear cases, because they do allow you to use smaller pinion gears. I'm not sure how small of a pinion gear you can use with the JPS gear cases, because I've never gone that smaller than stock on mine with any of my JPS gear cases. But I know that with the hot racing one, according to their website, their gear cases can accommodate down to an 8-tooth pinion gear, and that's pretty small. So just something to be aware of, and I would have put this information in that previous video I did that showed all the aluminum gear cases, but at the time I filmed that, I had no idea the size of pinion gears that can be used with the Hesse Machine gear cases. So now I know all that information, so that's why I'm saying it now in this video. One thing that I forgot to mention in my video about the Stormer 4-to-1 gear reduction units is that the way they work is that they increase the amount of power by basically adding another counter gear to the driveline assembly. And one thing that they also do too is that by adding that extra counter gear, they also reverse the rotation of the motors. So if you can imagine this being a complete Clod Buster here, front gearbox is on the left, rear gearbox is on the right. Because I now have the 4-to-1 gear reduction units, now the reverse rotation motor has to go here on the front gearbox, and the standard forward rotation motor has to go on the rear gearbox. So in my video about the Team Brute Racing motors, I made a point of using the phrase that I've always used since day one with Clod Busters, that the reverse rotation motor goes in the rear gearbox. That all still is true, and that all applies unless you have one of these gear reduction units on your Clod Buster. So a gear reduction made by either Stormer Hobbies or ThunderTech Racing. I don't know of any other ones like that, but those are the only two that I know of. If you have one of those, you have to flip that thing around and disregard what I said before. If you have the gear reduction units, the reverse rotation motor will go in the front gearbox, and the forward rotation motor will go in the rear gearbox. So just wanted to clear that up, because if you do it like you normally do and you put the reverse rotation motor in the rear, what happens is after you add these gear reduction units, if you do that with the rear rotation motor in the rear, with the gear reduction units added, as soon as you hammer the throttle, guess what? Your Clod Buster, your bullhead is going to go full throttle in reverse, backwards. So you got to swap the motors around. So just want to make that clear. So that's basically what I'm using on my new Clod Buster that I'm building. Inside both of these gear cases, got full ball bearings in there. The gears are the stock plastic Tamiya gears, and the axle shafts, same thing too. Those are stock Tamiya axle shafts. And for the record, I got all the internal components for these two gear cases from my brother. So he was getting rid of his old Clod Buster, so he gave it to me. So I took all the parts from that truck. That truck had very few miles on it. It was basically in almost brand new condition, so I reused all the parts in here. So to my brother, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You helped save a few bucks on this project. And hopefully the next time you see these axle assemblies, if all goes well, they'll be actually mounted to a chassis, and I can show you what that looks like. Just give you a little bit of heads up on what's coming up down the road. This week I'm supposed to have delivered a special component that I had made for the Crawford Performance Engineering time warp chassis that I'm using on this truck. So I had that sent out to a machine shop, and they made the part for me, and it's supposed to be here in a few days. So I will be showing what that part is and how I'm going to mount that to the time warp chassis in my next video. So please stay tuned for that, and I'm really getting excited now. So now that this truck has finally gotten to this point, it's kind of like, oh, it's finally starting to look like a Clod Buster, finally. So I'm getting real excited, and I can't wait to show the next video that will show some details of the chassis construction. So stay tuned for that, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. I do read all of the comments to my videos. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next video.